Mhm.
Ready to go.
Right. Well, I want to say thank you, Laurie. And as I noted in the beginning of my introductions this evening, the connection between these two artists and the way that they use photography. Gino Miele has been using photography in his lifelong interest in perception, spirituality, and mysticism, believing that each photograph may tell us more about ourselves than the subject we're photographing. Gino's photographs have appeared in thousands of publications, and his artwork has been exhibited internationally and acquired by collectors worldwide. He has taught for Adobe, Apple, ICP, Fuji, Anderson Ranch, and many others. We're so pleased that I think Gino's been teaching here for close to 20 years.
I was going to check. It's a little crazy, and it's thanks to you, actually.
Well, Charles, who's here. And yeah, you got the whole family here, Gino.
Nice.
So, Gino, like so many other dedicated workshop faculty, has transformed the lives of so many students. And I can't wait to see how that turns out this week, and thank him for tonight and sharing his work with us. Thank you, Gino.
Thank you. Yeah, so I've been preaching this week that photography means, or creativity means, getting started and not knowing how it's going to turn out. And I think that's true, but it's a challenge as a workshop instructor to live that reality of getting started and following a process and not knowing how it's going to turn out. It's occasionally mildly stressful. Laurie and I are just getting to know each other, and we've been probably orbiting around each other for years and years. But hearing you talk in Santa Fe a couple weeks ago and just now, it's there's a lot of synchronicity in the way you and I see things and the way that we teach. I will also use the word imagination more than once. And I also believe that looking back at our work and engaging in the pattern recognition of what we were up to is akin to sort of checking out the breadcrumb trail that we leave for ourselves in our photographs, in our artwork, in our lives to sort of figure out what we're up to. I mean, my photographs are messages I leave for myself, and sometimes it does take decades to decode those messages. I'll get to the pictures in a second, but I'm just going to talk for a minute and say that when Laurie talked about sort of linking the past and the present, what I think about is I think about how all of us here are linked in a lineage of photographers, students, artists, provocateurs who have passed through this place. And years ago, perhaps one of the first times I taught here, I don't know, 20 years ago, whatever it was, Matt Thorne and I were getting ready for me to give a talk, I guess it was at the Opera House, and he totally freaked me out by pointing out, like, who had spoken there before me, And so when I think about the lineage of the other photographers who have spoken here, at Union Hall, at the Opera House, in this place, I feel really honored. I mean, I feel a real reverence for that. And recently somebody was talking to me about some of the students who have passed through here who have gone on to become incredibly successful. And, it's a really cool thing that we share all this together. So I'm going to show a few pictures that are not mine. I'm going to show you 3 pictures that I pulled from the web, and I'm going to talk about those. And then I'm going to show you a bunch of pictures from northern New Mexico, which is my new home. And I don't mean this as a slight to Maine. I've made a lot of really, really good pictures in Maine, and I've showed those before. But I wanted to share with you what I'm up to now and what's inspiring me now. And so the first thing I want to show you is this picture I pulled from the web, and I'm going to read to you what Michelangelo supposedly said. He said, "The sculpture is already complete within the marble block before I start my work. It's already there. I just have to chisel away the superfluous material." And I kind of feel like that's what we're doing as photographers. Part of our choice is to say yes or no. And so I feel like every photograph that we make, every photograph we share, every photograph we show is also showing the entire universe outside that photograph that was chiseled away. I mean, part of what people don't realize about the yin-yang symbol is that it's not just the balance of masculine and feminine, of negative and positive, of black and white, and the balance inside that circle, but the circle also implies everything that's outside the circle. And so the frame kind of, it implies everything. So I think the way I see photographs these days is, and it's always been the case for me, that the post-processing is really, really an important part of my creative process. But I see the photograph themselves akin to a rough stone, right? So this is, again, a picture I pulled from the web. It's a huge diamond that's completely uncut. And this is kind of how I see raw files. And it's how I saw negatives as well, because even when I worked in a traditional darkroom, I did a lot of darkroom work. I did like multiple enlarger stuff and negative sandwiches and all this compositing, and I still really like compositing, but it's interesting to me that part of what we're engaged in here is the craft of cutting and polishing and faceting the photographs that we make, putting our imprimatur on them, putting our style on them in a way that's akin to cutting a raw stone. So I think it's fun to think about how many ways we could take that photograph and cook it up. And that's one of the things that we're talking about in class this week. So in the class that I'm teaching this week, and in probably all of the classes that I teach, there are big questions that we ask, like what's the difference between a snapshot and a photograph? What's the difference between a picture that's almost good and one that has mojo? What's the difference between a photograph that provides information and one that transports you? I just read the book by Marion Zimmer Bradley, who famously wrote The Mists of Avalon. But this other book, sort of a prequel to that, and in it she wrote, "The other world touches yours at many places, though there are not so many now as formerly. The stone circles, like Stonehenge, are gateways. They're gateways at certain times, as are all the earth's edges. Mountaintops, caverns, the shore where sea meets land. But there are some spots which exist always in both worlds. And those are the places that I'm interested in accessing. Those are the places that the Celts called thin places, where the veil between the worlds is not so definite. And so it's not the places that I'm interested in so much as the photographs that seem to give me access to that feeling of floating in between. I'm interested in making photographs that are like those places, a way of linking this world and other unseen worlds that may exist parallel to ours. I had a student recently tell me that his goal was to make photographs he wanted to look at more than once. And I think that's a really hard thing to do and a really beautiful desire. That's kind of a test for me. And I also recently met a college professor who told me that he makes double exposure photographs in camera in order to sabotage his logical mind. He used that word sabotage, which I thought was just great. It's like, his interest, like mine, is in making photographs that speak to a part of us that has nothing to do with logic. It has nothing to do with words. It has nothing to do with intellect or figuring things out. Like Laurie, I'm interested in imagination as a tool to make photographs. So, some photographers and Laurie specifically, said she identifies as a storyteller. And I think every photograph does tell a story. It allows us to project a story. But I think photographs also all contain secrets. And I'm way more interested in the secrets than I am in the stories. When I go out looking for photographs, I'm not looking for... I think what I'm looking for is the energy. I'm following energy rather than following things. And, you know, sometimes it seems like I'm using the camera as a divining rod, hoping it'll point me in the direction of that energy that I want to bask in and those secrets that, you know, are there, but you can't really tell what they are. So I don't want to understand my photographs. Understanding implies thinking. And one of the things that I've noticed in all these years of teaching is that photographs that are made from thinking or from ideas are way less interesting than pictures that are made using our other senses. So for me, and this might seem kind of obvious, photography is more about seeing than it is about thinking. It's also about playing a game of what if. I'm really interested in playing this game of what if I made mandalas out of pictures? What if a photographer who is largely identified as a landscape guy couldn't resist waylaying people who dressed up for the first ever Dia de los Muertos festival in Santa Fe? What if I did stuff that was just fun because I wanted to? So there's this big question that I think COVID brought up for all of us, which is, you know, what if we spent our time actually doing only the things that we wanted to do and not the things that we didn't? And I think that threw kind of a wrench in the world, but as far as creative process goes, I think that's a beautiful invitation, and it's also a challenge. What we all want to do, and I think what workshops really bring up, is we want to do what has worked before, and we want to stay inside that comfort zone of where we know things are going to work, and I think that's really a challenge. It's really hard. You know, again, I think this is where imagination comes in, and I think I'm going to show you some pictures. Okay, so Laurie talked about, I'm also Jewish, and and one of the reasons that the cross is such a powerful symbol in so many cultures is because what the cross represents is it represents the place where ordinary reality meets non-ordinary reality. And I think that as photographers, we're all magicians, and I think that we're all reaching for that place where ordinary reality meets non-ordinary reality. So this particular group of photographs is sort of an excuse, a geographic excuse, for me to show you a bunch of stuff where the thread that runs through it might be place, but it just might be me. It just might be the things that I'm drawn to, the things that I'm interested in. And these are all a reflection of images that sort of make me feel like something's happening. They're pictures that I respond to with my body. And it's an interesting test to see whether other people respond to pictures in a way that reflects what I hope my intentions are. And I had a really interesting experience recently where I'm making friends with this guy named Lester Fu. who's a hypnotist in Santa Fe, which is where I live. And Lester's not a photographer. He's not a particularly visual guy. He is a guy who's really interested in the unconscious. And unsolicited, Lester told me that he went to my website and that he spent a whole bunch of time with this photograph. And then he wrote me a letter, and I won't read you the whole letter, but basically what the letter said was that for Lester, this photograph spoke to him, and it asked him a question. And the question that kept recurring for him was, what's behind all this? What's behind all this? And that was incredibly, incredibly gratifying for me, because that's the question that I'm asking as well. I feel like I'm making photographs not only as a form of divination, not only as a way of learning about myself, but I feel like there's all this stuff that's just beyond what we can see, and that if I play with my photographs just so, what'll happen is I'll get a glimpse of what's just beyond what I can see. People keep asking me whether I'm happy that I left New York City, whether I'm happy I left Brooklyn to move to New Mexico. And they're always really surprised when I say, I don't miss New York. I feel like it was an addiction that I got over. And I'm just so profoundly in love with the sky in New Mexico. It's just endlessly fascinating. When that storm rolled in this afternoon, it's just like there's a feeling that happens when you're in the presence of stuff that's bigger than you. And that feeling is something that I chase, for sure. This one? By the way, you guys should feel free to ask questions. I would rather converse than talk here. This is actually a place called Black Mesa, which is not at Ghost Ranch, but I have to confess that up until several weeks ago, I had never been to Ghost Ranch, and I just spent quite a bit of time there, and I absolutely understand why Georgia O'Keeffe had such a proprietary feeling about that place, and why she wanted to live there, and why she kept telling people that she owned Pedernal, which is this mountain here, this mesa. The story that she tells, or that she told, is that God told her that if she painted this enough times, that she would give it to her. Yeah. It is a cool rock, and you could look it up on a map. My friend Josef Sky Tornik, who is a photographer in Santa Fe, who makes his living selling prints basically just off the plaza there, he has a particular response when people, photographers especially, ask him where something was because he knows they just want to go to that location. He says, I'll write it down for you on the back of the receipt. So why don't we turn up the house lights a little bit? And if you want, you can ask questions, but I'd much rather that we chat. So if there's anything you want to chat about, let's talk for a little bit. Yeah.
Do you have a spiritual practice that's everything or is that too personal?
No, it's not at all too personal. And you know, the joke that's not a joke is my spiritual practice is I try not to be an asshole. Right? I do meditate almost every day, and occasionally engage in psychedelics, which I think is also a really important way of seeing reality and remembering what's true for all of us, that there's a fundamental goodness under all of this. But I don't know, I think it might be more of a spiritual struggle than a practice. How about you?
I see
So what do you see? What do you see?
Well, you desire to get to the right place.
Yeah,
You know,
right. Thank you.
I get that.
What's your name?
I really do. Barbara Cream.
Thank you, Barbara Crane. So that's right. I mean, landscapes are about place, and some of these are real places, and some of these are sort of not so real. But there is a desire to get to a certain place that I know exists, but like Avalon, right? The mists come down, and if you don't know the right words at the right time, you can't get there. Yeah.
Do the keys that you apparently wear around your neck help you unlock those things?
The keys?
They look like keys.
These are just reminders. One of these is a one of these is a figure of Ganesha, the elephant god, who is the remover and creator of obstacles. And my mom brought me this from Rajasthan. And so I've never been to India, I'm not a Hindu, but there is something about this that has me wearing it every day, not just to remember my mom, but to remember other stuff. So both of these are just reminders. They're reminders that we're all friends, we're all old friends, and that there is a better place, right? And that better place is attached to this place. That better place is here now, and we always have access to it, but it disappears and reappears, and it's only by grace that we can find it. Yeah.
So I'm not a photographer. I must have come in the wrong board.
Oh, thank goodness. Thank you.
But looking at I have a little cognitive dissonance here. I see a lot of commonality in photographs.
Yeah.
Choices of black and white, choices of very few humans in the landscape. You know, there are these four things that you can sort of tick off and say the majority of them do this. So how does that square with the idea of what you were talking about freeing yourself and imagination and all those things?
So
I mean, I want to be a little more specific.
Yeah, please.
I'm not trying to be aggressive, but I mean, are those things templates that then you work inside of? Are they choices because you just like them and it's all you go? Or, I mean, I'm just kind of curious how that works.
Thank you. And I think, cognitive dissonance is a good way of putting it. There we go. Sorry. So I read once that the University of Wisconsin did a study, and the results of the study found that we do stuff and we make up the reasons later. So I'm just going to make up some reasons, and I think if I understand your question correctly, I think one answer is the resemblance between what comes out of my camera and what I'm showing you now is the difference between this and this. What you would see if you just looked at my raw files or my contact sheets would be, at best, a questionable resemblance to the final photographs I'm showing you. So does that answer your question, or is it a different question?
No, I had that something from the beginning. You shared it with us.
Right.
For that reason.
Got it.
I'm just curious about there's so much commonality there that seems to be the strong through line. I'm just kind of curious about it. It didn't seem to be addressed. When we think of imagination, we think of this opportunity to go in multiple directions.
Right.
And
So
I see
do any of you know the photographer William Clift? Okay, so I met him through a series of coincidences and sort of hilarious mishaps. And Bill is kind of a curmudgeonly guy, and he really believes in straight photography. And so, Bill said to me one day, he said, "You're not a photographer, you're a painter." And I'll take that as a compliment. I think you had a question as well. Yeah. Yep. all the time. Yeah, I'm following a process and I'm listening. And so, so I have a process that's not dissimilar to Jerry Uelsman's process, where he photographed a lot of things and he made all these contact sheets. And apparently he had them strewn all over the house, and he would just wander around the house and he'd say, oh, that would go with that, maybe. And I had the privilege of being at a lecture that Jerry gave for his 80th birthday. And I hope you all know his work. If you don't, please look him up. But in front of an audience of probably 1,000 people in, I think it was New Orleans, he gave a talk like this where he showed like 50 pictures that didn't work, which I thought was the most generous thing to do. And what he was saying is that even after doing it for decades and decades and decades, he was dedicated to this process of discovery and of like being honest about what worked and what didn't work. And he said that his goal was to astonish himself. So my goal is to play and to listen to the photographs and see where they lead me. And sometimes they lead nowhere. And other times, I wouldn't say I astonish myself, but other times I feel like I've received a gift and that photography is an act of midwifery, not an act of craftsmanship. Please. Oh, that's funny. When do you give up? Like, people always ask, when is the picture finished? Maybe, but I mean, it's a feeling in your body, right? And Sean and I were talking about this the other day. It's like the question isn't, does it work, but do you feel anything? And sometimes what you feel is frustration, and sometimes what you feel is like, wow, thank you. And so I just keep at it the way that I guess a golfer keeps at it, you know, because every time you go out to photograph, every time you go into the dark room or onto the computer, there's this infinite possibility that this might be the best picture that you ever made. And so that's the practice, is keeping at it and being honest with yourself about what works and what doesn't, and engaging in the pattern recognition of, oh, like there's all this stuff that I didn't see that's in there about the old and the new, or, you know, oh, I've just been trying to tell myself that Cartier-Bresson apparently, I saw an interview with him in some BBC documentary where some punk kid was interviewing him when he was older, and he was painting. He wasn't photographing. And this kid kept asking him about photography. And finally, in this incredibly French, incredibly impatient way, he said, I'm not interested in photography, parenthetically, God damn it. I'm interested in geometry and emotion. And so what I'm interested in is I'm interested in learning to see. And I think photography might just be the excuse. Yeah.
Because in your approach to psychedelics in your art,
Yeah.
is it separate? Do you do it for your own mindset and then put your art with the memory of that? Or do you ever approach the taking of the photo? Or the editing or the kind of reimagining of those beautiful landscapes? Or again, is that just kind of the memory of those perceptions?
That's a really hard question to answer, and I've never attempted to actually photograph under the influence, but I feel like engaging in psychedelics in an intentional and ritual way is a way of visiting reality. And so upon my return from reality, I hope that I could make some images that might have some echo of the beauty and love that underlies all of this, but it isn't like there's a together thing with those things. And I think you know, making and sharing art requires courage. I mean, there's some vulnerability, and I think if any, well, okay, fine, I outed myself. Show of hands, how many people in the room have ever done psychedelics? Okay, so these people know that certainly the second time you ever do psychedelics, it takes tremendous courage. Because you don't know what's going to happen, you don't know what's going to come up, you don't know what you're going to find inside yourself. So, you know, bravo to you people. I feel like we might be going a little long. Any other questions? Yes.
Did you notice that they took chase what you're chasing with this series, or did you just end up in Santa Fe and Flowers?
Well, these are made over many years. I've been to New Mexico many times, but what they say in Santa Fe, and I didn't find this out until I actually arrived there, is they say it either sucks you in or it spits you out. And so I think Santa Fe decided on me, not the other way around. Anybody else? Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, everyone. See you tomorrow.